Hello, good afternoon. A very warm welcome to everyone. I am Jinyo from Green SG Collect. I hope that everyone had a great start to your Saturday and already had your lunch. We are really happy to be conducting this webinar in conjunction with NParks' annual Sustainable Fest. In relation to the theme of biodiversity, we have a great panel of speakers today to discuss more about our relationships, perceptions, and interactions with the wildlife around us. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and we will be publishing some of these clips on our social media pages. Before going into the webinar proper, allow me to share more about Green SG Collect. We are an NGO and a registered charity aimed at creating communities of learning, joint initiatives, and advocacy for biodiversity and a sustainable future. Through webinars and our other activities, we want to spur deeper understanding of the climate crisis, co-learn, and spark community action to preserve and protect our environment. We have organized multiple webinars covering a wide range of topics such as fashion, the circular economy, and green jobs. This year, we have also started to collaborate with different schools on developing youth leaders and innovators to spark greater awareness and action for the environment. For the flow of today's webinar, we'll start off with an introduction by our moderator, followed by short introductions by our distinguished panel of speakers before moving to a dialogue session. There will be a Q&A segment where we invite you to openly ask your questions in the public chat anytime during the webinar, or you may signal your interest to ask your questions directly by using the raise your hand function. If you're facing any technical difficulties, you may message Brian through the chat function to seek assistance. And without further ado, let me introduce our moderator for the day, Dr. Ngo Kang Min. Kang Min is an experienced forest ecologist, having conducted multiple research on trees in Singapore and regionally. Beyond that, Kang Min is also an active volunteer and community leader. As the chief executive of Green SG Collect, she hopes to marry both her expertise and interests to spread the love for nature through knowledge and engagement and galvanize a passionate community to protect our environment. Handing over to you, Kang Min, please.
Thanks, Junyo, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar on human-wildlife interactions. I'm very happy to have our three renowned panelists here today. Each of them are experts in their own field, to be here to discuss this very pertinent issue, and they bring with them their valuable first-hand experience working on the ground. So first we have Dr. Adrian Lu, Group Director of Wildlife Management and Parks. We have Dr. Harvey Neo, Senior Fellow and Program Head of the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities at SUTD, and Ms. Anbu, Co-CEO of the Animal Concerns Research and Education Society of ACRES. So how this session is going to go is that each speaker will take about 5 minutes to introduce themselves and their work. Then we will move on to some deeper discussions about this topic. So shall we start with Adrian's introduction?
Should I just go ahead?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, hi, Adrian. Thanks a lot, coming. Yeah. Thanks everyone for attending this this talk and spending your afternoon with us. It's a really great opportunity to showcase what we do and also in a collaborative way as well. Recently, we announced our four-pronged approach to wildlife management and living with nature, because over the course of COVID also, we get a lot of feedback about wildlife. Is it returning? Are we overrun by wildlife? There are so many otters. There are too many macaques. These sort of questions. And it's a good opportunity because we are now, embarking on a city in nature vision. And a city in nature vision, right, is really very important because it's not just about animals. It's really building a greener Singapore, as part of our SG 2030 plan. And also think about, how we can extend our nature park networks with, announce a few like the Sungai Buloh Nature Park Network, and also intensifying nature in our gardens and parks, and restoring nature into our built environment, such as, some of the industrial estates and around the neighborhoods. You might have heard about the 1 million tree movement. And all this is really about greening today and also greening our future. And these are actually, in a way, responses to climate change and allowing, our youth of today also to deal with what they face also with eco-anxiety. So they're actively planting trees, they're strengthening, they themselves, the community is strengthening connectivity between our parks and gardens and, and the core areas. So a lot of our roadsides you see now become nature ways. Yeah, so what I mean about the four-pronged approach to wildlife management is really to, number one, right, is to really, for MParks, we work with our collaborators in the universities, and also our wildlife partners like the Otter Working Group, the Macaque Working Group, to really understand the ecology of animals and their behavior, and also what do we do, as a holistic approach to reduce human-wildlife conflict, reduce feeding, where there are a lot of hotspots, what is happening there. Do we need to reduce exotic palms, to reduce the number of wild boars that are in certain hotspots? So these are really very important insights into the ecology of the animal. How are they behaving? What should we do around otters? We should leash our dogs because otters are really very interactive animals as well. Not to go near animals when they are babies. They become more protective. So those kind of insights are very important. But what do we do with the insights? We do things. We need to engage the community. So we have a lot of wildlife working groups, the Otter Working Group, the Cat Working Group, Urban Wildlife Working Group, which looks at seabirds, looks at pythons, snakes in general. And they together with us, we meet very often. We share a lot of information. We meet with acres. We meet with, the Mandai Wildlife Group. We meet with people from the universities. And we come together and we share this knowledge. But that knowledge, right, it doesn't just reside amongst us. It's very important that it goes out to the public. And more so, we realized that during this COVID period, right, people were going into our nature reserves, going into our parks to escape, and then it might be the first time they're interacting with nature, and they might not know how to do it. As we saw people going in with their bubble tea, walking around, and next thing you know, we see a macaque holding a cup of bubble tea running around. It's quite strange. They do like it, yeah, because it's sweet and starchy. So this is what we mean, and this is something that's important to us to do that public education, and we are really very delighted that Green SG has brought us into this webinar alongside really experts in the field, so to educate people and to also share, to also understand what's on the ground as well. So I'll come in. That was my introduction. I hope that was all right. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Adrian. That was very good. So now let's move on to Dr. Harmonious.
Okay, let me zoom in. So I'll start. Introduction of myself, just so that the audience and fellow panelists know where I come from and how I really look at nature and especially animals. So really, when I talk about nature or environment, I take a very all-encompassing perspective, and specifically animals or urban wildlife, which is the topic of today. I've done some research as well. But really, in terms of animals, I have looked at dead animals, live ones, animals that are harmful, animals that are beneficial to humans, animals in all their guises. So that's what I have done. And I feel it's still a learning process, not because I'm a bit slow in learning, but because the context always changes. So it's not my problem. It's everything that's around me that is the problem. Well, no, I shouldn't say it's a problem. It is a learning process because things keep changing, right? So what I have so far is really, I'm going to start at the end and then going to start at the beginning of my journey. So really at this point, I feel that, social change best organically led by individual change. And how does individual change occur it sometimes it occurs quite spontaneously at the individual level, but most times I think it needs a little bit of encouragement. And what SG Collab has been doing is precisely that kind of thing that will propel individual change. However, I've also realized that many social structures are actually resistant to individual change. So then we come to a kind of impasse. The individual wants to change, but somehow there is this constraint that is a little bit beyond the individual's control. Thirdly, I think a lot of times we are faced with catastrophes, social catastrophe, environmental catastrophes. I think that there is always a silver lining in catastrophes that already happen. Of course, we should prevent that from happening if possible. But if catastrophes do happen, then we can find a space to capitalize on it such that we can catalyze complete change. And in that sense, right, the structures that are resistant to change will be gone. So let me go down to my initial journey. This is what I, okay. Now I'm revealing my age a little bit, but my journey into environment and nature started with a honors thesis really on golf courses. And I wouldn't want to claim credit for all the changes in this golf course land use policy. I think 15 years after, about a decade or so after I've done my thesis. Basically, this thesis is really talking about, the conclusion is that it's highly illogical and problematic for Singapore to keep emphasizing its space scarcity while yet keeping so many golf courses. I mean, it's a no-brainer kind of conclusion, but I think it is what it is, So I did that, and then I've decided to take a master's in geography, master's of social sciences. Focusing on geography, and here I'm looking at still part and parcel of environment, but household recycling, which I'm sad to report that since 2002 there hasn't been much progress in this. Not research-wise, not my research, but household recycling still remains at a very unsatisfactory level, I think. So this is 2002. Then I spent a year working for an airline, not as a cabin crew. But then I decided I was not cut out for corporate life, so I decided to take a PhD. Here, I went to US to do a PhD in geography, focusing on social and environmental geography. And what topic best illustrates social and environmental intersection than pig farming, not in Singapore, but in Malaysia. So long story short, it was a study that was against the backdrop of the Nipah virus in the late 1990s as a starting point to talk about the history and development and future of Malaysian pig farming industry. So that's 2007. So these are the dead animals. Then post-PhD, I'm just introducing some of the research areas that I'm interested in. Green urbanism is one, and there I look at how citizens engage with the concept of green urbanisms in the form of ecological cities, community garden, and opposition to golf courses. So that's green urbanism. I look at animals and society as well. Dolphins, macaques, community cats. I look at food and society. I mean, this is an extension of the 2007 research that I did on pig farming. So here I'm looking at meat production specifically, in a demand supply kind of analysis. I also look at vegetarianism, activism towards vegetarianism, and things like organic food. Since moving to SUTD in, let's see, when did I come here? 2017 or 2018, I've also looked at cities, but not exactly touching on the green urbanism bit, but really on technological inflected cities. So smart cities, and this is looked at in the context of Southeast Asia. So it's beyond Singapore. Finally, this is really what I'm trying to do now to build communities that thrives on the three keywords here, resilience, rallying, and responsibilization. In other words, individual take responsibility for themselves, community take responsibility for the community and the individuals that make up the community, and the country take care of the communities, and so on and so forth. So back here again, this is where I'm at now, and the four strands of research that I still do would be human-wildlife interaction, citizen-centric urban science, health, community action in health, self and community action in health, and novel foods and society. So that is my introduction. Sorry, I think it took more than 5 minutes.
No problem, but thanks, Harvey, for still a very brief introduction of your career. And now we have Ms. Anbu give her introduction.
Thank you very much, Kanbin, and also to Green SG for this opportunity. Hi, everyone. Just share my screen. I have a few slides. Okay, I hope you can see the full view. Hi, everyone. I am tuning in from India now. So it's very interesting to be part of this initiative, because when I am in Singapore working on this issue, we see different kind of feedback and opinions. And when I'm in India, there is a lot of mess, but there's also order in chaos, but also there's a lot of wildlife sightings. I was just sharing with the organizing panel that there's about 15 frogs who are sitting on this window where I am actually seated. So they come in for respite from the heat because it's very hot. So they come in during the daytime and sit in. So it is very different to imagine how this would be if I am to be in Singapore. So I work with a local organization called ACRES. We are basically, what we do is give animals a voice. So we are an animal welfare advocacy group. So our work usually, it goes through different focus areas. I think most of the time people know us for the wildlife rescue and rehab work that we do. So it's very interesting to hear also from Dr. Harvey on other aspects of the work that he's doing and interest, because we also work on promoting cruelty-free lifestyle, on sustainable choices as well, different lifestyle, everyday options that will help the environment. And volunteers play an important role through the community outreach work that we do. And of course, we will never be able to stop rescuing and helping animals if we do not do the education work. So we start very young as well. So we try to tackle different animal welfare issues through the different focus areas. So coming to today's topic, how is it relevant to the work that my colleagues and volunteers, we all do, you can see from the number of calls over the past few years. I'm sure NParks and the then AVA would have faced a similar trend as well. It's not because there's too many animals, it's really because there's a lot more awareness amongst the public. Oh, there is a number to call, then they call. And also it is in line with the social media, the rise of the social media. So people are more aware, so there's a lot more calls. That means it shows that groups like us and NParks and other nature groups, including Green SG as well, we all have a lot more work to do in order to educate the public. So what does our wildlife management team do? Because we do have a wildlife rescue team, which is basically running around handling calls that we receive to a hotline. But we realized that it is putting out fires, right? Because there's a problem that's already existing out there. We wanted to focus on how to prevent fires from happening. So we launched our wildlife management team, which handles about 200 cases a month. What we do is when people do give us reports or sightings of wildlife, it is very much complementing to what NParks also does. So we do site visits, we talk to people, we try to address the root cause of the issue on why the animal is there and why is the interaction between the people and the animal is negative in that context. Then we prepare a report with photos, we follow up with them to see how our recommendations are working. Sometimes it can be a very simple thing. It could be a bat hanging onto a light fitting and then the bat is pooping on the floor. And it could be just a simple solution like changing the light fitting. So we work on some practical, feasible, cost-effective solutions. And if needed, we will do a sustained education program with the stakeholders. It could be a school, then we will do a program for them. So together, what do we do is with other organizations, including NParks, Mandai Wildlife Group, similar to what Dr. Adrian just shared, education institutions, and even volunteer groups like Otter Watch. So we work together to draft SOPs as a working group discussions, joint site visits where we join forces. And we recently launched a joint initiative called Our Wild Neighbors. So I welcome you to also visit that website where we all have joined forces, put our brains together to put in advisory and information on different native wildlife. So I'm just going to wrap up this thing very quickly. I just added some images. Sorry, Janu. So we just added on how people do, what we see from public about the challenges that the animals, our wildlife face, in addition to challenges that we may face as human beings, right? So glue traps is one of the things that many animals do. I think here you can see the whole food chain from insects to geckos to the snake, who is protected wildlife. And some reports that may come across as animals gobbling up. It's just the way they are projected sometimes in media, and how animal sightings can be projected when they are published. And sometimes people may take things in their own hands by, doing something to the animal to manage the situation, which is not only against the law, but also requires a lot of education. This happened a lot during the COVID time, during the circuit breaker times. Where glue traps were used for wildlife and the people were also darting some wild animals. And feeding of wildlife is another challenge. We are happy that the current Wildlife Act actually protects it, and NParks has a lot more heightened enforcement efforts, which actually deters public from feeding. And becoming a roadkill is also another challenge. And so it might not be just the interaction, but as a result of the interaction, they could be drawn to the roads, not just snakes, but also, this is from Herpetological Society. But also there are other cases where, they are really in the middle of the road. And this is a bit of a heart-stopping video because there's a kukul on the right-hand side, and this is a snake. We had to do this very carefully because we don't want cause any accidents. The snake was still alive, it was not run over. And the lorry really stopped on time because we had to put a triangle and everything. And there you go. And the snake was alive and to be released on the side because we were rushing for a meeting. So yeah, so it was an unexpected case. So we had to, it was a racer snake. So we released by the side. This was taken a few years ago. Yeah. And other structures can also pose a challenge. This is because of development, but also it requires careful planning to what happens to wildlife. Same thing with designs as well, and structural modifications that can cause trouble to wildlife. I'm happy to share that just last month, this concertina wires were removed after 3 Colugo cases. The Swiss Club actually removed it, which is fantastic. And sometimes we get a bit more extreme. Sorry, I'm just sharing this on a light-hearted note. People do call and ask. I'm sure NParks also faces their own set of, comments like this, where they ask us to remove an owl, relocate an owl, because the owl was very loud. And same thing with frogs and toads, who might be very loud at night. So this is really extreme, but we do sometimes get cases like that. So there is a lot more education work to do, and we hope to continue to do this to promote coexistence. Thank you.
Thank you, Anbu, for those really on the ground sharing. That video was really, very gripping. So thank you all for your brief introductions. To start this webinar off, we are all aware that in the last few months, actually few years, there's been quite a number of reports about wildlife coming a bit too close for comfort. Otters, wild boars, macaques, even monitor lizards. And the wildlife, and the thing is that what is common to all these pieces of news is the negativity of the interaction. Someone got injured or someone got bitten, trash bins get overturned and everything becomes a mess. But I also want to bring out the little positive interactions with wildlife that probably happen on a daily basis if you go to a park. And a lot more people experience this, but they don't get reported. So things like watching a sunbird or butterfly flutter, around a flowering shrub, or watching a squirrel hopping amongst the leaves. These are simple acts of observing wildlife, which are also a kind of wildlife interaction. But they almost never get featured in news, compared to these more dramatic negative news that often get reported. And so parallel to the type of this media coverage, the negativity on human-wildlife interactions, as Anbu has shown, we are also seeing a very sharp increase in the number of rescue calls that acres receive. So if Junyo, you can pull up that graph that Anbu showed just now. So from just want to focus on the last three reports, right? The top three graphs. So we are seeing, from 2018 to 2020, an almost 50% increase in the number of calls. And then for the number of rescues, it was actually about a 30% increase. So would you like to tell us, Anbu, besides this increased awareness of the rescue hotlines, like you mentioned, like why have the number of calls increased so sharply within the last 2 years? Were there any difference in the cases that you saw in the last 2 years compared with before COVID?
Thanks, Kangmin, for pointing out that increase. During the COVID, the number of calls actually doubled. So our monthly average was about 700 to 800 calls before COVID. In April, it started increasing, and now we handle about 1,600 calls a month. That's like more than double now. In the past 2 years, it did increase. I think it can be attributed, I mean, we don't have an evidence to prove that, but also there was a lot of interest about nature during the COVID time. There was increased attendance to virtual events on nature appreciation. There were so many virtual events that were conducted. There were creation of groups online, exactly what you just shared about positive interactions. There were quite a few Facebook groups that were opened during COVID times where people started sharing, hey, what is this butterfly? What is this plant? There was a lot more interest, which is great. And then we also noticed that a lot of people were calling from homes, because when they leave their house and go to work, they don't get to hear the koel singing during their Zoom call from outside their window, right? So they actually start observing these things, and they had the time to make a call. Because usually it's maybe the domestic helper might be home, they might not be home. So when they're home, they see a monkey coming in and stuff, then they call. Or because there were a lot of food waste as well, that was packaging waste that was left during COVID times, because people were ordering food. So I think this is an assumption again. Our bins were not designed to take the volume of packaging waste that was left during the circuit breaker. So that did bring quite a few animals very close to urban centers, from wild boars to monkeys, and also pigeons. We have, we did observe an increase in pigeons coming to eat the food waste, but not to the eateries. So I think it was a very interesting period during that time, because of less human movement, but also changes and trends in terms of animal sightings.
Thank you. Would you like to, maybe give some of the more notable cases that you've encountered in the last 2 years? Did you find like most of the reported, the cases, were the wildlife in problematic situations when you go to the scene?
Not so much. That is why we had to increase the intensity of the work that was done by wildlife management team. We felt that most often we were rescuing people than the animals, because the people were genuinely fearful of the animals, and they did not know what to do. They really felt that the animal needed rescue. So we do see the spectrum of calls, right? So one group is very, very caring about the animals. They really feel that they believe that the animal needs rescue, even though the animal may not need rescue. And on the other end, we have people who are very terrified of the animal. They just want the animal to be removed from their side. So whether or not the inconvenience is justifiable. So we do see that spectrum, and NParks, I'm sure they also see that spectrum of feedback that we receive. So we saw that during the COVID times, there were a lot of calls that involved rescuing animals that did not need rescue, mainly baby birds. Sometimes people find baby birds they bring home. Out of good intention, they may keep for a few hours and stuff, and they may not know where exactly they found the bird. So that one, we realized that we just need to raise a lot more awareness, because these are people who want to help wildlife. We just have to tap on their potential towards the right direction. We have had some calls also about bats. There was an increase in the number of calls for bats during the COVID time, but after May, it died out. There was not so many. Yeah.
Thank you for your sharing, Anbu. And it's a very good point. A very interesting point that it's the humans that actually need the rescuing, not the wildlife. And so I think a few of you mentioned about education, right? We need to educate the schools, the students, the public. And actually, we are aware that as Anbu mentioned just now, ACRES now has a website called Our Wild Neighbors for this purpose. But if we think about this, about education, right? Actually, the average Singaporean goes through primary school. Let's say they go through secondary school, and then more and more people are going through tertiary education. So that's 6 years plus, let's say 4 or 5 years, and then 3 to 4 years education. So in total, that's about 13 to 15 years of education that the average Singaporean receives. Is this not enough education for us to coexist with wildlife? Or rather, what I would like to ask the panelists, in particular to Harvey and maybe to Adrian, is does the average Singaporean have the correct mindset or values or attitudes to coexist with wildlife? What else do we need besides formal education?
Would I perhaps I should
yeah,
start?
sure, please go ahead.
So I think my perspective on this very important question has changed through the years, and now I do not think that the education system or society at large is the best place to inculcate such attitudes towards meaningful wildlife interaction. In fact, not just that, towards all kinds of behavior, ethical behavior. I don't think the school system is the right place to especially target that. As it is, the school is required to do countless things, whatever facts that come along. Now they are so into coding and programming, it never ends. So I think it should start from the individual to cultivate a set of skills or a set of mentality that will enable the individual highest chance of learning about such things. So the mindset of curiosity, the feeling of empathy. I think these are the things that will be much more useful and not just limited to human-wildlife interaction. It could be applied to a range of social ethical issues. So that's my very realistic assessment of it, because if the school system can and has been successful in inculcating specific values to environment or animals, we have seen some results, but I do not think that we have seen much results in that regard.
Thank you, Harvey, for sharing. Adrian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think these are great insights from ACRES and Harvey. Similar to ACRES, we deal with a lot of feedback. We deal with about 2,000 to 3,000 feedback a month. And all, COVID was quite interesting. We got this, the bad feedback was really a lot. It's as though people for the first time notice bats flying around at night, and actually they've been there for the longest time now, but because the attribution to bats and all that, that there was a lot of fear, but we managed to educate them, saying that as long as you are, if they're healthy and all that, it's not in a wet market, we're not eating it. That's fine. Leave it alone. Animals in the wild have their own way of dealing with all these type of zoonosis. And I think the school's curriculum. I was a teacher for 8 years. It's crazy. We can't expect we can't cram the curriculum. But I think there are now inside the textbooks and all that local examples of wildlife. So I think what we have been doing is really great. I've worked alongside with Anbu, and in fact Harvey is also advising on some of our projects about human mindsets towards wildlife. And recently we set up these nature kakis in neighborhoods. So we started with Boon first, and we are going to spread this around. Nature kakis is bringing the education to neighborhoods. In the past, when you have webinars, people who are interested, like the participants here would, enroll themselves in. But now we are bringing that message into the neighborhoods. It's not whether you like it or not, but we want to expose people to nature. And it's not only about like macaques, wild boars, the noisy quail, chickens, but actually, what about, the nice sunbird that you see, the very pretty magpie robin that's singing in that park and all that. It's like the whole suite of things, butterflies, very beneficial insects that are pollinating our trees and all that. It's very important that people understand the whole fabric of nature. And because we are trying to develop a city in nature, how it benefits us, the trees, the greenery, the livability, and the fight against climate change, and all that. We want people to know that. Then maybe there'll be greater acceptance of the plethora of wildlife that is. There's a better understanding that hey, there is a bigger, sort of a very strange world out there, that I've never encountered. I mean, you take a pair of that binoculars and you look at a beautiful kingfisher, right? And you'll be astounded, by the colors, and then you feel like you are like in another different world, like Avatar, you're in a very different world, and then suddenly you appreciate nature more. And hey, maybe there's a chance you might appreciate that koel singing, trying to find a mate, or that macaque trying to protect its troop. Maybe there'll be more appreciation for that once you understand nature better. So yeah, and we're trying our best to bring that out. So and thanks to our partners, that's always been helping us do that. Yeah, sorry, long answer.
No. That's a very good answer, Adrian. I like your the whole fabric of nature, idea, and it's very true. We are actually living within nature and not outside of it, and we have to learn to live with it. But coming back to Harvey's point about schools not being the right place, or even society not being the right place, but we do need to start somewhere, right? What do you think is a good place to start? Do you think like a whole of society approach is required, if not siloed into schools or families, or could it be a family level? Could it be at the neighborhood level, as Adrian was talking about? Could it even be religion?
I think that in my mind there are two strategies that should be done in tandem. One is to have groups like yours. You occupy a mid-level strata. It's not society per se, but it's beyond the community and individuals as well. And you have the passion to transmit such messages. So I think it's best to at one level to have groups like Singapore Collab or ACRES to spearhead some of these specific messages. But in general, the more challenging and I guess even more important education to have is what I said earlier, to cultivate sense of empathy, curiosity, and this thirst for knowledge, right? Because a lot of these human and wildlife interaction, they are based on ignorance. They are based on lack of understanding. They are based on irrational fear. So no matter what education you give, right, if they are not able to move past all this incomplete knowledge, irrational fear, there's very little things that can be done, And I'm sure Ambu has many examples of people who are just have such immense irrational fear over animal A or B or C or D. And they just cannot see that they are being irrational. So it's tough, but the mental strata of individuals needs to be changed.
Thank you, Harvey. Anbu, do you have anything to add to that?
I think very interesting. I'm learning a lot, hearing the insights from the other speakers as well. I just wanted to add on about the education part. I think what can be beneficial is to insert the message in all ways possible, to approach it holistically. So for example, what we are trying at our end and also along with NPACS is to work with HTB, for example, to so if I were to buy a flat, we look for amenities, how far is MRT and all that, but we are not looking at what animals do we cite. How am I supposed to equip myself with the knowledge on what to do, what not to do when I come across? And most often people buy flats or properties that are themed based on nature. They are called like Forestville, Nature Vista, all these very green themed residential estates. I think we also need to insert that expectation there in terms of some sort of mandatory briefing that these are things that you will come across and these are things you should do and not do when you come across wildlife. So I believe that education should be inserted at any level possible. And people who, so there's a lot of people who are unaware and fearful, like what Dr. Harvey mentioned. And also we come across people who might feel like, why should I cage myself up when, why should I do this? Because I've spent a lot of resources buying this property and you're asking me to mesh this window up. You're asking me to, mesh this area up. So I think we also, in some way, this is a challenge. If it was easy, someone would have done it before. So it's a challenging thing to do, which is to request and appeal for more tolerance at certain level.
Thanks, Anbu. Your last example about caging yourself up, despite spending so much money on your property, actually leads me to my next question. We know that NPACS is working with community groups like ACRES and the Jane Goodall Institute Singapore, JGIS, on the monkey guard program for dealing with one species, the long-tailed macaques. So to Adrian, perhaps for the benefit of the audience who don't know about this monkey guard program, could you briefly just describe it? Because it's a collaboration with community groups, and we would like to know if there's similar programs that help to deal with other species.
Yeah, so the Urban Wildlife Group, right, was set up also, and of course the Macaque Working Group and the Otter Working Group. Just to touch on the monkey guard program. Like what Harvey touched on, sometimes people feel like they don't feel safe or that kind of thing. And that fear is real, it's real to people, and of course education is very important. So we do spend our time on the ground, ACRES also, they are always on the ground, and my staff are also always on the ground, educating people. Even the wildlife contractors that we have now are trained, to actually educate. So that's one thing. And of course, there's the monkey guard program where monkeys are somehow it's a vicious cycle. Sometimes the monkeys find trash and waste there, and so we try to educate people about the excessiveness, how to deal with their trash, how to cover their trash so that monkeys don't come. But monkeys are very smart. They are very heuristic. In that they will search and and they do come in. So monkey guard was one very non-violent way, a very humane way of actually conditioning the monkeys to say that this is not your territory. It makes use of a long stick. That stick is never directed at the monkey. It's just used to tap, and the monkeys have a natural fear of a human with a stick. You see. So, and it's to guide the alpha male, actually very gently. If you see someone from JGIS do it, right, it's very gentle. It's almost like leading the macaque, in a way like, okay, I'm more alpha than you. I'm going to lead you away from this condominium or this house. And so that has become a very important tool. And in that teaching people the tool, right, we also teach people about macaques and their behavior. And there's an alpha here, there's a juvenile here, hey, there's a baby, there's a female. Interestingly, they get really very intrigued by the truth after that. And then you sort of form an understanding about the macaques, and then people warm up to it. Yeah. And then so that is like breaking the ice, and they don't look at them as like pests anymore. They look like, hey, there's a sentient animal, that's there, and that's how they behave, and what are their motivators and all that stuff. So it helps in the conflict and understanding of these issues. But the guarding also helps sort of alleviate some of the issues that we have. Yeah, and I just wanted to touch on it. I saw Jacob inside the crowd, and he's always an inspiring teacher. So we know that the school curriculum is like chock full, right? But there are inspiring teachers like Jacob there from Commonwealth Secondary School, and he literally planted a forest in the school. And the school is beautiful. I mean, if you go to the forested area, there are trails for students, and it's very cool. It actually shows it's like a microcosm of city nature. It cools down the environment. It makes it very beautiful, the school, and people are involved in the planting. Animals start to come, and he's documented the green pigeon, and different type of thing, monitor lizards coming, and then and those are teachable moments. So like what we do, right, in wildlife encounters, these are all teachable moments, teaching the public and all that about wildlife and wildlife conflict, coexistence. And I think we need to add one thing called wildlife appreciation also. So like I say, there are really other animals there to appreciate. And some of us from a nature background would be privy to that, because we grew up, we were guided by mentors like the late Subaraj and all, and he would show us like, you are now stepping into an animal's home, and you have to keep quiet and then appreciate the animals. Like, wow, that's amazing. And then once you do that, right, you go into a nature reserve and you do that, and you come out having more respect for wildlife. And that respect, doesn't only mean about appreciating, also appreciating if you don't interact properly with the wildlife, it can endanger you, and it also can be and you can also endanger that particular animal as well. So education is really powerful. Like, we talk a lot about it, but it's very important. While we have a lot of things set up, like because as a rescue center, NParks has a 24-hour hotline. We also have our Center for Wildlife Rehab, and we also train wildlife contractors to actually catch snakes properly if they are in people's homes. And then after that, we do the release of the snakes as well. So yeah, so it's a holistic approach that is needed right now. Sorry, another long answer.
No, thanks, Adrian.
Go
but
on,
you brought up a few good points, right? Like the participants of the monkey guard program, just spending time with the program, observing the monkeys, and they start to feel some kind of relationship, some kind of bond with the monkey. And I'm wondering if all we need, right, is to just slow down, just look around us more, and take the time. Don't rush from place to place, right? To just observe and build that relationship with nature and wildlife. So I think now we should move to the Q&A section. And for now, if anyone in the audience have questions, you can raise your hand and ask verbally, or you can type your questions into the chat box. Actually, there is one question in the chat box asked by Samuel Chung. Okay, I'll just read it out. So the question is, as we resume normality post-COVID, there seems to be a general wane in interest in nature in Singapore. How do we sustain the interest, especially being a city in nature? And in the long run, how can we build a society that's harmonious with nature?
Let me give sorry, I'm a pretty quick answer to this. I think if there's a general interest amongst especially people who have never expressed or have such interest before, it is a good start. And I know during COVID time, right, there are a lot of mass media coverage on such issues, which again is good. But I think moving forward, right, the optics need to be clear. The optics need to be reflective of urban wildlife in general. So I think to carry on with this interest, we should not just stop the news of urban wildlife encounters in the press, but then also to report it in a way that is, I would say, realistic. The last thing you want to do is to, because of your mass media optics, right, create a false impression of certain animals in the public's imagination. And then when they come to that, it becomes something of a shock to them. I'm thinking of the otters, actually.
Anbu, you were going to say something?
Yeah, okay. I think it's a very important thought that we all should give some time to it, which is on how to engage, sustain them, the crowd, because during the whole 2 years, 1.5 years, there were a lot of cyclists who come during the weekend around the nature areas, particularly in Tengah, where I also live at the rescue center. So when I walk the dogs every morning, in the weekends, there'll be so many cyclists flying down. They actually stop and take photos of the sunrise and stuff. Immediately after 24th April, there were none. After they relaxed the restrictions, the immediate weekend, there were no cyclists at all. So I realized that people were flying, they were waiting to get out, and their interest locally was, it's so true. So it's good that there are some pages, because in the pages, Facebook pages itself, we see people interacting with each other. Someone will post something like, I saw this very cute baby I want to bring home, and then some other people will go and comment there saying, no, this is not correct, it's illegal, you should call NPALS, you should call ACRES, or put back the baby. So we see that people are helping each other, so they're guiding each other in some ways. When there is a need to go in and add, we try to go in and add in whatever that's needed. But in terms of Harmony, I think we need to sustain all the engagement efforts that's happening, whether it's heartland efforts or whether it's in a school or whether it's a community nature initiatives that NPAX is doing, tree planting, anything that actually brings people together to sustain their interest in nature needs to continue. Unfortunately, I don't think we can achieve it overnight. It needs to we have to keep pushing for it and hope that within the next generation, we will have more voices that will be pro-nature compared to what we may hear. Like, I mean, we only hear all the time complaints, right? It's because that's where the hotline is for. People are complaining because they want something resolved. So we do need to hear the other voices as well, which we are starting to see already. There are, media letters written by members of public. We are seeing that people are concerned and they welcome certain humane approaches for wildlife management. So that is a good thing. We just hope that it can be sustained. I think that can only be done by continuous pressure, engagement, and education.
Yes, totally agree, Anbu. Adrian, would you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and if I may, I think COVID was like a blessing and a curse like that, right? Of course, we don't want these type of things to happen. And it's unfortunate that a zoonotic disease like that can go, but it made people introspective in a lot of sense. Introspective into their lives and what they want to do with their lives. Because there was a pause from all that craziness, and then we got very busy during COVID because a lot of people wanted to seek solace, and they did that in our nature reserves and in our parks, and we had to have a lot of safe distance officers there. It was no joke, like one moment you are like tying red tape around the park benches at midnight, for the opening the next day, and then after you remove it because things change along the way, close out some car parks, open the car parks, that kind of thing. And then walk around and make sure that people weren't crowding and all that. But it showed that, in a time like that, right, Singapore being such a small island, highly developed as well, we could actually escape into pervasive greenery. Yeah, so that is what sitting in nature means. Nature really gives us respite. Nature really gives us a lot of calm. My own kids, they were pretty stressed. I mean, the youth, especially these days, they're faced with a barrage of nonsense, in social media and all that. And then, they seem to be having a hard time. But then they found solace in, walking with their friends in the nature parks and nature reserves, and they could breathe in, mindfully, the calmness that greenery gave to people. And I thought that was important. And so what comes with this type of benefits, right, is wild animals. And you learn how to appreciate them, and you learn how to also uh, love them, and also be a bit careful when you're around them as well. Yeah, so yeah, that's a great question, Samuel. That's a great statement. Yeah.
Thanks, Adrian, and I'm very aware of the time, but we have one more question that just came in from two persons in the chat group, in the chat box. So this person is asking, yes, it's we need to visit these nature places, nature reserves to understand about biodiversity, increase our knowledge. But isn't it also important to reduce human disturbances in their natural habitats?
This comes
Because humans can be quite stressful for them.
Can I
Sure,
answer
sure.
this question? I'll
Yes,
just
yes,
start
of
first,
course.
a very short one. That's one of our difficult jobs that we have to do at parks when we manage parks. We want people to go there, but we also want people to make sure that they understand some rules. And we have rules, and we have these signages that say fine if you go through off trail, fine if you feed. It's like the whole panel of signs, but that's for enforcement purposes. But the reason behind those is actually the biphasic use of forests. So like certain especially the very sensitive nature reserves and nature areas and certain parks, right? You cannot go in after 7, and that's the reason why you can't go in. And that's because a lot of the nocturnal animals will be very active then, and we want to reduce that disturbance. So there are a lot of reasons behind it, and yeah, maybe we need to do a better job in communicating those reasons at parks. So maybe that's important. That's a good question. And also, why shouldn't you go off trail? One of the things that I've learned, and from people like Kang Ming, who's been dedicated to forestry research all her life, is that some of the seeds in the forest, right? Once they grow, right, they remain very small, in the forest, but they can be a small sapling for 15 to 20 years before a gap forms, and then the tree grows up. And we don't want people trampling on that also. We don't want people to leave a human scent in areas like that. So those are the reasons. And unfortunately, Singapore is very small. Yeah. And so we have to do that. It has to be very tight. Yeah. Sorry, that's my response to that.
Thank you, Adrian.
Maybe I would just add on very quickly. I think first, that's a very great question. First, I think animals are actually highly adaptable. So a little bit of human disturbance won't necessarily do them great harm. So that's one. And second, if there's any conflicts with human and wildlife, right, I must say it's always the human's fault. Because there is no questioning of the animal's desire and their instinctive behavior. We know that. And we also know human behavior, but yet human behavior is the scariest and most difficult thing to change. So I feel that's the question. And also in place of actual visiting, right? I mean, we can watch videos and all that. I think that serves in the education bit as well. So that would be my suggestion. If the disturbance really become too much and it's hard to manage or control.
Thank you, Harvey. Thanks for making that point very clear that humans are a very, very important part of this equation to coexistence. So I think I'll just like to wrap up since we are already running over time. Our park space is going to increase, right, by year 2030. According to the Singapore Green Plan, every household will be within a 10-minute walk from a park. So we do have to be prepared to see wildlife nearer to our homes. And we have heard from all our speakers today that humans are a very important part of this coexistence equation. And just to end off, we know now that travel is picking up, and actually many tourists, they would pay substantial amounts of money to go to these secluded jungles to see wildlife, right? And I was recently in Sabah for a school field trip, and there were tourists, already going to these really remote forests just to see the wildlife and be surrounded by nature. And we in Singapore already have this nature and wildlife right beside us without traveling anywhere else. But we just have to learn to live with them. So a very big thank you to the three speakers for kindly giving your time for this webinar, especially to Anbu, who is dialing in from India, and to the audience for your active participation. So now I will hand it over to Junyo to do the wrapping up of this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Kang Min, and thank you, speakers, for the very insightful discussion. I think it has left us with different perspective to ponder on how our relationships with nature around us it's going to help us as we move into city nature, right? I think we may not be able to answer all the questions that especially some of you have answered, have gave us through the registration form, but we'll try to follow up with the response from our speakers via email. And before we end, we also really like to thank our organizing partners. Firstly, Singapore Pools for their support for the work that we do, as well as our speakers and their respective organizations for such an engaging discussion today. And lastly, let's also thank our team of volunteers behind the scenes, as well as Jeremy from NParks, who has also played a big part in making this possible. And as we move forward, we have some exciting events lined up in July. So remember to give us a like and a follow on our social media to catch our latest activities. If you are posting about this webinar on social media, please tag us at Green SG Collab, and we will love to hear your thoughts and takeaways from this session as well. And with that, we've reached the end of today's webinar. Thank you for spending time with us on a Saturday, and I hope that you enjoy your time. We hope to see you again in our future events. Thank you and have a great weekend.